There's this one line where she says, with each photograph, York is building a visual terminology for this journey she's on, which allows her to quite literally live life on her own terms. Just love that. The process leads you somewhere, and then you find you're in a new place.
I wanted to thank you so much, Torrance, for taking time to speak with me today.
Oh, I'm very excited. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a thrill, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about you and the work that you do. And I can see images behind you, so I'm looking forward to this.
I like to live with the images. It helps me edit better.
So why don't we start? I'll just ask you about when you first began taking photographs.
So my first time that I fell in love with photography was in 5th grade. I went to this school and the headmaster loved photography himself. And so he had a dark room. Then we all had the opportunity to start that photography in 5th grade. So I loved to take, at that time, I loved to take pictures that I thought were orderly. I was very drawn to architecture and geometry. And I felt like I was satisfied by having this, this imagery that just, I loved focus. I guess that's what it comes down to. I liked democratic focus is what I called it. But I really changed over time because my landscape photographs are about 90% out of focus. So that's where it started, though.
Oh, I find that fascinating. And I'm just going to make a very quick comment and then we'll continue with you. But when I first went back to doing drawing classes as a young adult, I thought I wanted to go into architecture. So I would take the activities and I would pull my ruler out. It was just a general drawing class. I had my ruler out and I would do these really careful, measured, straight lines. Yeah. And over the years, now my favorite is just charcoal, messy, smudgy. There's no rulers, there's no straight lines, so I think as people, as we evolve, those things that we're interested in or we're attracted to do change. Yeah. It's neat. So what did taking photographs mean to you as you evolved in your practice? How has it changed in that way?
It's hard to know how far back to go, but I think that the most powerful times in my fine art practice of it, as opposed to, shooting portraits or things like that, I feel like it's grown from, it's always been a way to connect. I guess that is sort of the overarching theme of why I photograph. That's kind of what I have come to. And I learned so much about myself because, it was fun to think about the word vulnerability and the process of art making when I knew I would be having the opportunity to talk to you. And I think that the vulnerability is really the key to what I need to find, right? So the process of photography gets me there. And that's kind of the role that it's grown to play. It's become a tool that I really need because it's kind of the way I process my life.
So something you just said, I'm going to play it back to you because I'm not sure I heard it. Is vulnerability part of your process to get somewhere, or is your process to approach the state or being, I guess, of being vulnerable?
Well, I think that the need to explore the vulnerability is what helps you manage and grow through a process. So I didn't really, I know that I learn about myself through my art. But when I started to think about where's the vulnerability and all of that, aside from just showing the world something you made, I realized that that's really part of the target. That's really an essential target to get to the point of managing and looking at and exploring what is most vulnerable to you?
That's actually super helpful because I think I, up till mostly now, have thought about vulnerability as the goal. That's the end state. That's what I'm
Mm.
trying to do, is I'm trying to approach. And actually, what I'm hearing you say more, which I think is actually way more interesting, is it's that step. You pass through that on your way to being able to see these other things, to be open to these other things, but you have to pass through
I
this
think
opening of vulnerability. That's cool. I like that a lot.
well, I think that's what I've concluded in my walks since I've been thinking about this in the last week. And one of your podcasts where you were looking at, am I vulnerable to what's inside me versus what's outside of me? And I think that's true. Like I had to kind of trick myself into thinking directly about what I wanted to articulate because it felt vulnerable.
So if I ask you that directly, if I say you have to make yourself vulnerable so that you can articulate what it is you want to articulate, what is that?
What is it that I want to articulate? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In my artwork or in this moment?
Could be both. It could be both.
Yeah, I think so. Each project is somewhat different. The ones that I feel have had the most emotional power. For example, when I was applying to graduate school, I ended up titling my landscape work "Refuge and Questioning." The walk to Paradise Garden by W. Eugene Smith has been a picture that always meant something to me. When I first saw it, are you familiar with it? It's like two young children walking through a opening in the foliage. Basically, they're sort of going through like an entrance. They're moving into the light, literally. So I think it's from. Actually, I should know that. I think it's from the 60s, maybe the late 50s. But it's a simple, like almost like a cliche image in a way. But I've always felt like when I shoot landscapes, that's kind of this protected space that has an opening of light that I've always wanted to emulate. So I literally felt like when I would take these landscapes and I'd be trying to create this space, I was using selective focus to help me shift the experience of the space that I was in and draw connections between different elements in the frame. But what I was looking for was a safe place. I was looking for like some kind of supported and enigmatic space to be in. So that was the source for that work, and therefore calling it that felt a little bit hokey or something. But I thought, you know what? Literally, it is like, it's just a metaphorical space that I've been making. So I'm just going to call it Refuge and Questioning. And I guess it worked out well enough since I did get into graduate school. And back then I was shooting black and white film with a Hasselblad that I used Hasselblad I got in the late 80s that I've continued to use. And it has a shutter in the camera, which is very unusual. They usually have shutters in the lens. The shutter in the camera allows you to go to 1/2000th of a second. So you can really, in the sunlight, shoot with low depth of field. All right. So what is it that I'm trying to articulate? So that was one theme. Another, I have a series I call Roadworks, where I lived in New York originally. I grew up in New York. I lived in the city for years after college and after graduate school. And I would, be entertained by what I would see in the city. You're on the subway, you're on the street, you're thinking of where you're going and what you're doing maybe, but if you're present, you're just really looking at the people around you. So then I moved to Connecticut and I think, oh my God, what am I doing in this car all the time? But then I would notice these marks on the road. And I was curious about them. So I would get out of my car and some of them were colorful and some of them were just like, oh, look at how the light hits the tar. And then skid marks was a big thing for me. So I love the narrative element of the skid mark, but I didn't know why I wasn't focused on what was the story. I just liked the fact that the narrative element of a skid mark implied an action had happened. And, did someone stop because of a deer? Were they just playing because, they could do donuts in this parking lot or something? So then when I was talking to my mother, she mentioned that looks like another tragedy on the road. And I thought, what? Well, my father died in a car accident hitting a tree. And I was in my, like, let's see, I guess I was in my 40s when I did this work, though. And in my 20s, I actually made a video about my father. So I thought, about the fact that I knew him through pictures more than anything else, and what were the stories around those pictures. And so it wasn't just like a biography, it was more exploring my understanding of him. So it surprised me that I was still processing, his departure from this earth in this new work. But it really was so powerful to come to that connection. So I think, that's the work I needed to do. I needed to understand that. I needed to allow myself to visualize this like pre-verbal emotional experience.
It's amazing how these things are just below and they find their own way of coming out. You find your own way of processing and integrating that obviously super important experience in your life. And then for your mother to just go, bam.
Oh,
it's this.
I was upset when I was talking with her because of the curator who had given me the show had left the institution. And I was really more upset about those, literally talking to her about how upset I was about that. But she connected it to the content. And I was like, oh, thank you. So yeah, that was meaningful. And then my current work, Semaphore, is also directly looking at my vulnerability of having been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
So talk to me a bit more about how you're using that work to work through that.
So I was diagnosed in 2015, and it wasn't until 2019 that I started this project. So I think that, originally I was taking a workshop when the project began, and maybe 2 years in, I told the teacher, Sandy Haber-Fifield, who's this wonderful photographer. I said, just so you know, I mean, it's not relevant to my work or anything, but just so you know, I'm struggling a bit because I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And she, of course, was sympathetic and empathetic, and if there's any way I can support you, please let me know. And but I didn't even tell the rest of the class for a while. Anyway, so then about a year after that I ended up, I was doing landscape work at the time, and I was trying to picture bright colors as opposed to the dark colors in my roadworks pictures, because they're dark mainly because the roads are black, but also there were, colors within, but they were the accents really. So I started to meditate when I was diagnosed. I knew I needed to reduce stress. So I learned to meditate. I took a transcendental meditation course, and it brought me a lot of joy to meditate. And I thought, well, why don't I focus more on the joyful colors? I've always liked spring and fall because of the colors as a time to photograph in the landscape. So that was one way that my diagnosis impacted my work, that I decided to work in a different palette. But eventually, Sandy gave us an assignment to photograph adjectives. And we each had to contribute 2 adjectives that we felt described ourselves. And then she mixed gave you someone else's adjectives. And the adjectives I was given were nurturing and optimistic. I knew exactly which classmate it was, so I could channel my love for that friend. But it was hard to do, and yet it was really satisfying. And those were 2 adjectives that I was already, or traits that I was already trying to emphasize in myself. I knew that, when you're facing any challenge, you need to be optimistic, but it's, scientifically proven that your health outcomes are better if you're optimistic. And I certainly needed to nurture myself more. As a parent, it's I've always been better at what does anybody else need before I figure out what I need, because other than, I'm hungry, it's harder to figure out what you need. And it usually takes more time than just going to the grocery store or, helping someone else, for me anyway. So the combination of working in this way to find visual metaphors for emotions or behaviors, it just opened a door. And next thing I knew, everywhere I looked, I found something that was meaningful to where I felt I needed to grow. For example, I would see a branch growing through a fence, and all of a sudden I'm realizing that nature is teaching me a way to be more resilient and adaptive. Or through the anxiety of the uncertainty of where my health would go and how quickly, the branches of a tree, and the tree I look at outside my studio every day, all of a sudden it looked like a network of neurons or a nerve cell with dendrites. So that helps me realize, how connected I am to the fear. And then when I wanted to say something in particular, I could set things up. So I felt one day walking to the doctor's office that I was walking in an asymmetrical way, that I know we all look asymmetrical, but I wasn't thinking about moving asymmetrically. And when I have a little bit of a drop foot is one of my Parkinson's symptoms. And so I would have to think, pick up your toe more every time I take a step. It's really annoying. And it prevents you from forgetting about the problem, right? So, but I got thrilled. I was like, oh my God, I have a way to describe this to the doctor. And then when I got home, I made this picture using tangrams of a composition that was asymmetrical. And that felt like, scoring a goal in a sport or something like that. Then later it's in the book, which I published the book of Semaphore last October. And when I showed it to a group of people, one woman said, well, that's an angel. And I was like, oh, no, I didn't see that. I kind of knew I was thinking maybe there's a head in the way I did it because I made several compositions and that one felt more meaningful. But it seemed like the gift that just keeps giving, making this work, living with this work, sharing this work, and growing through the process that, you give something a name and then all of a sudden you can look at it differently and you can share it differently. So that has been my process. And I guess sort of one of the source questions I asked myself was, what does acceptance look like? If I could visualize it, maybe I could reach it better. I don't think acceptance is a final goal. I think it's a moving target, but I think you want to get as close as you can. And that's kind of how I was thinking of making things visual. When I was a gymnast, which I did from the age of 5 to 22, one of the techniques I would always use was visualizing my routine before going up, but it had to be visualized without a mistake. So if I fell in my thought process, I had to think it over again, So I definitely believe in the value of positive visualization. So this became, literal.
Something just stuck out. I had a couple of questions, actually. I think it's just going back a little bit to the idea of acceptance. Mm-hmm. So 2 things around that. One is, how broad does that acceptance go? Are you thinking about acceptance around something in particular, like maybe physical changes in your body, or is it broader than that? And then also the balance between acceptance and positive thinking, which I absolutely see and understand the value of that, the way you're describing it. And at the same time, I'm thinking, and also there's acceptance of the times that we fall, or the times that and if we're visualizing that, that's okay too, because I accept that sometimes I'm going to fall. So I'll just leave that to just that idea of acceptance.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I am a perfectionist. I can't even say it. As a gymnast, that was a useful trait because you want to make your routines as perfect as you can. Accepting the imperfection was not something I ever cherished previously. But as an artist, I feel like that's maybe only in the last 5 or 10 years has that been an important part of art to me. I remember my child in school was studying wabi sabi, and I said, "What's that?" And I agree that one of my favorite pictures of a skid mark is under a tree that is asymmetrical, but also the picture is just a little tilted, like the tree is just a little tilted because of the way the ground is. And for a while that irritated me. And then, it's really one of my most favorite photographs that I've ever taken because it's a little off, it has a little more edge because it's a little off. So I now have a really different perspective about, when things are not quite perfect. And now that makes me drawn to that. So when I talk about acceptance in Semaphore, the project in particular, I am thinking about accepting the diagnosis and the new reality that I face. But it is also, I do also feel connected to the point of letting things roll off my back more and giving up control, because it's not always necessary. It's exhausting to try to control everything. And it's not important. It's actually more interesting to see where life takes you.
I would agree with that. And I would also say I personally would come from a place where I'm trying to be less invested in outcomes and more open to just watching things evolve. And I feel like you're sort of mirroring that even in your approach to your work, where it started very structured. Mm-hmm. And then you talked about allowing things to be out of focus, and there's a lot of thought that goes into that, like a lot of preparation and work for you to get shots that are out of focus in the ways that you want them. But that idea of being out of focus, of not being very structured or not more vague, but just less defined in what it is that you're looking for, is sort of mirrored in that process in your work, which is quite beautiful.
That's funny, because when I take the landscapes, it's one of the easiest things that I can do. Like it's so awesome. I have a waist level viewfinder, which has therefore a 2.25-inch image. And I could shoot the 12 pictures in the roll, in a couple minutes, but because it's film, I'm very much more studied about it. I also name those images in the landscape work of the GPS where I am when I take the picture, which isn't something the camera captures. So I have to capture it on a device and then write down the number. And all of that helps me to slow down. But I always feel that finding where to go and when to go, that's a really conscious decision. But once I'm there with the camera, it's just a delight. And everything looks so magical because I can see the shallow focus. Because usually your viewfinder will open the aperture so you can see, right? And then when you shoot, it closes down. So I'm actually just shooting the way it looks on that Hasselblad. That makes it easier. It's also backwards, but I've gotten used to that.
There's so much about the technical aspect of photography that I don't understand, because all I take pictures with is my phone. And so there's so much more to it. And the idea of having restriction in the form of material. So I've got 12 shots. I can't take 4,000 and then just pull out the ones I like. There's so much discipline in that. I really enjoy that.
Well, it's also easier later. I love that I don't have to pay for every frame. And when I started going digital, except for that landscape work, which whenever I shoot landscapes, I usually do go to that camera. I was so happy that I didn't have to pay, because we were renovating our house and there was the market crash in 2008. So all these things were happening at once. I was like, at least I'm not paying for film and FedEx.
If we still focus for a moment on the book Semaphore, if I asked you if you wanted to pick one photo that stood out, I'm sure I should have asked you that in advance. Pick one photo.
No, that wouldn't have helped.
Okay, it's totally, or a series or a theme. But I'm just curious about, take one particular photo and how that photo exemplifies the theme
Okay.
and your aim
That's
of the
actually
book.
not so difficult. Okay. So this picture here,
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful.
it's a
So it's a
picture of a
bowl.
meditation singing bowl.
Okay.
And inside it, it has a sprouted bean, lima bean. And the sprout is in the gesture of like a lunging person holding a stone. That's the
Oh
way.
my goodness. Absolutely.
So that
Wow.
is now my Sisyphus picture.
Who's the one who carried the big boulder up the, no, that's
He was rolling the boulder up, but it was on a hill, so it kept coming down.
right.
So in this
Okay.
case, the holding versus rolling is, I guess my uh, making my own version of it. First of all, there's the meditation factor, right? The mindfulness. Then the bean I grew in a glass, which is another picture in the book, with cotton balls and a little bit of water. It's like a kindergarten experiment to sprout that bean to grow something new. What I wanted to show with growing something new was the idea of neuroplasticity, and that when you do new actions or learn new things, you build more brain pathways. So that strengthens your cognition. So that's what the bean is about. And then putting the two together, it just came into this shape. I didn't say, I want to make a person walking, but it looked that way. And then there's the mold that's on the bean. And I thought, oh, should I take that off? And then of course, with the whole conversation we've just had about wabi sabi and all that, I was like, of course not. But it's the underside, like I don't like to look at how threatening it is to have Parkinson's, but I need to. So, in the book, I try to have a fair number of the images of what I do or what I see that inspires me to balance out the pictures that are more about fear. But I think, that's part of why I don't like the mold. But there it sits, And in this case, the background is out of focus because it's shot with a shallow depth of field. And so is the edge of the bowl. Just the base of the inside base of the bowl and the bean are the sharp things.
It's beautiful. And the colors are stunning too. There's something really rich and warm about those colors.
I was very excited because I do love orange. And there are a lot of pictures in the book that are really like objects in a white space. So it stands out more that there's just a handful of pictures that are like really also about color.
Very earthy too. It just has it's perfect backdrop for that sprout because it looks like it's not planted, but it looks like it's in a warm, happy space.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because the bowl is reflecting the sky. It was a great day. I shot this bowl several times, but not like on different days and things like that, but not with the bean in it on that day, because I probably would never get it to look just the same. The gesture of the bean, and it died, of course, because I didn't plant it anywhere.
I'm curious to know what kinds of feedback you get from people who look at your images. It could be semaphore, it could be other work that you've done.
It's really been rewarding to have people connect to it. One conundrum of having a book and an elevator pitch about the book is it's hard to pitch the book without saying that I've made it around this issue of my change in perspective on life, having been diagnosed. It is fundamentally also about loss and longing and inspiration, because of course, when you get a diagnosis, there's a mourning process you go through over what the future you thought you'd have, which you may not have even articulated, right? So one great moment was a friend of mine is a writer, and I had said, can I talk to you about my new book? And we set up a time. She was traveling and stuff. We set up a time, and like a few minutes before we talked, I sent her the PDF. So she didn't read the essay or the artist statement, which is where you get the information of what I was dealing with specifically. and her father had just died. And it was in COVID. So she said that I wish that I had this all throughout COVID because it gave me so much peace to look at these images. And that just made me feel so good, you know? It also reinforced my feeling that the images speak more broadly. They're sourced by my experience with Parkinson's specifically, but I think they can speak to someone handling a range of different types of challenges that require like growth and patience and introspection to deal with. Generally, people have appreciated it. One woman who I know wrote me this beautiful note about her whole process of going back and forth. And then I said to her, you know, was it hard for you to learn that I had Parkinson's? She said, I didn't know. And I said, okay. So she didn't even read the essay. And yet she got so much of what I was wanting people to get, you know. I also have this process of when I talk about the book, asking people, you know, what they think of certain images, that it's kind of become, each image is kind of like a thought or term for me. So the book is kind of like a long sentence. So I said, I feel like I've kind of encoded my experience. Now, what do you get from my encoded experience? And people, you know, obviously have their own interpretations, which I never think are wrong. No one's ever wrong, but they just expand on what I started with. So that's really fun too.
I always appreciate that idea that something that is born of very specific experience is very specific to you. And when you let it out, the range of interpretation becomes so much more universal that people can see. Maybe they see what they anticipate seeing, or maybe they see what they needed to see. The more open they are, but that they can take it and use it in a way that's relevant and then becomes very specific to them.
That's been an ongoing theme in my thoughts about art for a long time, that when we were in graduate school and I loved to photograph children. I loved, like, particularly my niece and nephew, like children that I knew specifically, and family imagery. And then it's Larry Sultan, right? Pictures from Home. I think Larry Sultan's book, Pictures from Home, was an example of how you can do work about family, but still other people can care about it. You know, I mean, Sally Mann is another example. Of course, her pictures are gorgeous. But, you know, in that case, you're not only taking an idea, you're taking a literal subject that is yours that you want other people to care about. Like, you know, a portrait. Does someone really want a portrait of someone else's kid on their wall? Well, if they're into fine art, sure. But if not, maybe not. But what I think is when you're able to make something that you know well, right? People say, like, write about what you know, or make art about what you know. And the more specific you can get, the more universal it can actually be. And with this project, I just felt it needed to come out of me. I felt this is my silver lining of my Parkinson's experience for sure. And the fact that I already had this practice of photography before I got this diagnosis allowed me to use it. And I thought, you know, maybe one reason I've been taking these square landscapes forever is that I wanted to take these square pictures. You know, it just felt like it needed to come out. So it felt more essential than any other project I've done.
I mean, you're obviously super open about talking about having Parkinson's, and you talk about it in that book. And so there's a question that's hovering in my mind, and it didn't even occur to me to ask you until sort of just now. And you don't have to answer it, but I can't help thinking about and sort of also in terms of vulnerability and you as an artist and photographer with Parkinson's, that is going to begin to affect how you can do your work. Physically, it's going to affect your work. So I'm just wondering how that just how you approach that, or are you starting to sort of anticipate how am I going to adapt my practice so that I can continue to work?
Well, what's interesting I think that's a very good question. And a challenging you're pointing out a very obvious physical challenge. literal challenge. What happens with Parkinson's is that you have your symptoms and then there are different types of medications. So originally, and exercise is something we can do to be neuroprotective, to actually slow the progression of the illness, which is so exciting. So in addition to having photography to do, to be active on my own behalf, I literally have exercise also, instead of feeling like I just have to sit back and let this happen to me, right? So I had more symptoms before I started this medication I started this past July than I do now. Having finally started that medication, that's made it easier. The changes that I already realized, though, was that sometimes I would photograph events that you want to get the shot, right? I mean, I'm not a photojournalist. I'm not generally a street photographer, but I realized that I needed to only do jobs that didn't require me to get that one moment, that I could get the moment after the one moment and it would be okay. So I could still shoot those things as long as, because I wanted to, but not if I was being paid to get that shot. So the idea of being quick about things, slowness is one of the symptoms that drove me the most nuts. And when I'm on this medication, it is rectified to a great extent. Also, I don't shoot on as slow a shutter speed as I used to, and I use tripods more and things like that. Those are ways that I've changed. I don't think about when I can't do any photography, because I think that will really not happen. I mean, hopefully I get hit by a truck before I become completely incapacitated. But I don't think, I mean, I've had it actually, my first symptom was probably 2011. So I'm already in like 12th year and I feel pretty good. So I have a wonderful group, several different groups that I belong to. One of them is called Shakers Anonymous, which is a support group. It's actually in my town. Two people from a town, one north and one south, came together, and this was like the meeting place. Then we started just a women's PD group online, and I get so much inspiration from the different people that I speak with in these groups and the different solutions that each person comes up with to manage things. So looking at the broad spectrum, yes, there are people who are impacted more in a more accelerated pace. It's really a very individual experience to have Parkinson's. So it is threatening, but I don't see how I won't be able to make imagery.
100%. Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Therefore,
And everything.
I'm pretty optimistic.
Absolutely. Amazing.
But when I think about who would hire me to do things, that is where, like, when I first got diagnosed, I didn't know how quickly I might go down, so that was really threatening. And I didn't want to tell people because I didn't want anyone to, pity me, but also because I just didn't want anyone to think I couldn't do anything. But once this work started, I realized I can't talk about this work without sharing that element. And I can't raise awareness about Parkinson's if I don't say that I have Parkinson's. So it became sort of essential to be revealing. And it was somewhat disarming when I get, an occasional call or an email from a friend. Oh my God, I had no idea. I'm such a terrible friend. I didn't know this. I was like, well, you're not a terrible friend. And thank you for reaching out. And
it's interesting. It's interesting. I can't say it's interesting somebody else's condition and the impact on their work, but just if I purely take myself out of it and just look at it, the way that your diagnosis influenced the choices of subject matter or themes that you explore is interesting. And then the ways in which you'll adapt as needed, if needed, over time, your process to accommodate that, and how that might influence the kind of work that you create. No question at all about not creating, but just how do those changes over time slowly, as far as even aging, the way all of us are transformed over time, and how does that affect our product through changes in our process, or the way we look at things, or the things we choose to focus on, or maybe moving to a tripod brings another change, another way of looking at things, or you might photograph different things because now you're on a tripod. And so that brings a stillness that maybe you start to capture, or something else captures your eye. I don't know.
Well, it's exciting to think about this. What I'm saying about my practice is that I still value something being sharp. Right? The whole reason I'm using the tripod is to achieve that. But there are plenty of photographers who everything's out of focus and moving the camera is part of their point. And so maybe I will take on subjects where that it is not important for me to be on the tripod. You know?
Yeah.
I like that idea. Maybe that's part of my future work.
Well, that was going to be one question I was going to ask you. One more question was where have you gone and continue to go after Semaphore?
Well, I do spend a lot of time working with the book and trying to find opportunities to share it. So I'm not working at the same pace that I'd like to be. And I realize that the work that I've been doing is really an extension. So I'm really not done yet. The themes of like containment and fluidity are two of the ideas that I've been recently playing with.
I love the containment, fluidity, that contrast, and even that's even like focus and out of focus in a way is it's contained or it's fluid. The focus is even fluid. And what we were speaking about near the beginning about having a more structured approach, or at least I did, and you sort of said you did younger in life, and then you evolve into this more vague, maybe slightly out of focus, more blurred. That's fascinating. I'm looking forward to watching what you do.
Thank you. I also think when I think about containment, I think it sounds inherently negative, yet it provides a structure. So I'm very interested in that dichotomy. I don't think there's anything negative about fluidity in the way I'm thinking about it right now. So they're just as an opposition to.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, fluidity is, if it's not contained, it's what can be lost. And even sometimes the way you live your life, right? You're super organized and constrained, or if you let yourself, or that happens to me, the energy, it's too much. And I'm exhausted because everything's left me and I don't keep enough in.
Right.
Supposed to keeping things out.
I did want to say to you, based on things I'd heard in your other podcasts about meditating.
Oh, yeah, you're going to help me. I was going to ask you earlier. I'm like, what's that class?
Yeah. So transcendental meditation is a process of having a mantra and meditating with a mantra. So you are filling your brain with that thought. And sometimes when I talk about the work of Semaphore and putting these ideas into a picture that I can then look at and share with others, I feel like there's a parallel there with meditating with the mantra where you're putting your focus on the mantra. So it allows the brain to relax.
So cool. No, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm happy to meet you.
Me too. So happy to meet you. Thank you.